Welcome to Tail Learn Code. Here there will be tales about software development, learning from each other, code to build solutions. And now your host, Chad Green.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As you can see, we're doing another one of our interviews today. And today I have Jeff Grammer. Now, Jeff, you can actually speak now, but I had to tell Jeff to be quiet for just a moment. Although actually I forgot that I actually changed the settings so it doesn't display or play off any of the audio. But I keep on forgetting that. I just be quiet.
Yeah.
But so welcome. So sure enough, and I mentioned this before, I mean, today's interview will be a little bit different. Because sure enough, on Twitch, pretty much on most every social media, I kind of stay away from politics. If you talk to me personally, you know I do not stay away from politics, but I do in the public realm, just because there's a lot of different opinions, and I've just found it better to stay away. But today we will not be doing that because we're talking to someone who's actually running for an elected position, and we'll get that here in a moment. So I want to ask a lot of questions about tech and politics, right? And how can we make politics better and make the country and in particular Kentucky better by potentially having someone in tech in a legislative position. So with that, Jeff, I mean, go ahead and just do a quick introduction of yourself.
Well, my name's Jeff Grammer, and I am I'm a computer geek that's running for the State House Representative in Kentucky for District 36. Just a real quick kind of synopsis about one of the reasons that I really wanted to kind of do this was because we actually live in the most technological connected world at any time we've ever had before. Which means that we're also, if you look at things like what's going on with regulations for Facebook, even things like in Europe with the GDPR, all these types, legislators are actually starting to get involved in actually crafting legislation about and for and with technology. If we as geeks don't have a voice at the table, they're not even going to know what they're talking about most of the time. After we don't even know what they're talking about. It's just, even the terminology, they don't understand.
Yeah, Jeff and I were joking right before we came online, and the whole thing, every time that there's a tech issue, and generally see this more with the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House of Representatives, and they're asking like the oddest questions, and of course all they know, again, I mean they're a doctor or a lawyer or some type of business executive. All they know is what their staff has told them to ask. But sometimes I wonder if the staff kind of loads them up with questions that make no sense. Let's see what happens if they ask this question, right? But so I definitely see a need for more in technology running for positions, for different types of elected positions. But let's start off with your career in tech real quick, and just so we get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
Talk about, how did you get your start in tech, and what have you been doing over your career?
Well, originally, I've actually had about a 30-plus year career in information technology and computers in general. I started out, literally, I got involved as a teenager writing accounting software on the Apple IIe computer platform. That's where I got my start. And that was when everybody thought PCs and Apple IIes were, toys.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was still on big iron at that time. So I kind of cut my teeth, or actually literally grew up working with PCs, computers, and microtechnology from that standpoint. And it kind of took off from there. I started doing things like writing routing software for a company called Proteon Networks. I worked for Vencor. I've been in and involved around technology for like 30 some odd years in both network development, writing those type of protocol type softwares, all the way up through, like I said, writing user interface accounting software. Even today, working with things like web-based languages for Golang, which, by the way, I wish we would actually, I wish this area, like Louisville in general, would be a little less Microsoft bigoted and actually start looking at more Linux-based architectures. So,
well, someone who's made his whole career in Microsoft technology, I like the way. But again, I'm a little bit biased when it comes to that, right? It's I've joked with people who say, well, how can you stand Microsoft? And I mean, now obviously it's gotten better because Microsoft's more open source and everything. I'm like, well, Microsoft's made me a lot of money over the years, so how much can I complain, right? I fed my family all these years, doing Microsoft technology, but I get your point, right? I mean, Louisville is very much a Microsoft town. Yeah. I mean, to the point of, so Code PaLOusa, this is our 10th year. And I think every year since the first year, we've gotten, we've heard from folks. And it's like, well, why don't you have this? Why do we have had so much Microsoft talks? I'm like, well, because I serve the Louisville area. And guess what? Everyone here, not everyone, but a good percent, probably 60 to 7% of people, work on Microsoft technologies.
Yeah.
And when we started, it was probably 80+%. I mean, there has been more diversion, in the past 5 years or so. But no, I again, well, I'm a Microsoft fanboy. I get exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, and sure enough, I mean, that's really not just Louisville. That's kind of course, who knows what region of the country we're in, but that is definitely the Midwest. Because Kentucky is somewhat in the Midwest. Again, depends who you ask. If we're in the Midwest, we're in the South. Kentucky's just there, right?
Yeah,
but yeah, most of the Midwest, outside of Chicago, is Microsoft territory, and it's been that way for a very long time.
Yeah.
Like I said, Chicago is definitely an outlier. Detroit is becoming an outlier because of Quicken Loans. I mean, they've been doing a lot. I mean, they're definitely focused on Microsoft. That's
true. I've heard about them being out. That's true.
Yeah. I have a lot of friends that work at Quicken, so that's why I know a lot about what goes on there. But well, great. That's cool to hear. You've been doing this for a long time. I think, I mean, you and I are around the same age. I think a lot of us in that age bracket, got to start with those toy PCs, right? The Apples. My first PC was actually mine. So I actually grew up in this industry. My father was a software developer. So we had all kinds of computers at our house as a kid. But my first computer that was mine was actually an Atari 400.
Oh, yeah.
So, which is the one that didn't have a real keyboard. It had like that thing you had to punch to hidden the keys. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But, well, great. So, you kind of alluded to this a little bit. I mean, but, what is your primary reason for deciding to go run for a elected position?
Yeah, well, like we kind of started out, is that we'll look at just what we've done just since the whole pandemic has occurred. If we didn't have technology in place, we would be in a massive world of hurt just from an economic standpoint, without being able to, and then the healthcare standpoint, if we didn't have technology to kind of be able to do what we're doing, like what you and I are doing today, being able to connect with that. Technology is an integral part of how we live our lives today. And legislation is going to come down to try and manage that or get their arms around it. Anytime anytime anything becomes pervasive as part of our culture, legislation and law structures are going to follow behind it. If we don't have people involved in that decision-making process who understand it at a very fundamental level, we are not going to get good legislation as a result of it. I mean, just take something as simple as like security and privacy information. Actually, would you rather have someone who thinks cross-site scripting is holding a pen and paper up against a mirror and writing backwards? By the way, I really wish I was making that statement up, but I actually was someone referred to it by that. These are the types of things, like I said, they don't even actually necessarily understand the terminology that is being used in this industry. And there's almost no one in place to do it. I can't tell you the number of times that I've actually been talking to people in a political circle who say, "You're kind of unusual." It's like, well, I'm a computer geek. Of course I'm going to be unusual. I mean, I have tattoos that are based in science and math, even to the point where I actually have the equations put on there. So yeah, I'm going to be a little odd, but that's just who we are as people. But as a result, though, I said we had come out with a different perspective. We know the technology. We understand what we're talking about. And when we start looking at things like legislation and crafting this, we can at least be objective about what it is that's being put in play.
Mm-hmm. Sure enough, I mean, I was looking up your campaign information. But let's just start, before we get to the technology stuff. Let's cover your general issues that you've highlighted, because I think they're worthwhile talking, even though they're not necessarily technology related. Yeah. Especially because, I mean, again, this is for Code PaLOusa, and part of Code PaLOusa is highlighting the city, right? I mean, that was part of the reason why we started this conference, and I think some of these issues highlight this. So, your number one thing you've got there is infrastructure, right? Now, sure enough, for those outside of Kentucky, probably don't understand that Louisville is definitely, gets the short end of the stick when it comes to tax dollars. And that's been an issue. I have no idea if it's ever going to be resolved. I mean, it's a long issue. And I forget the numbers, but it's, I don't think we get 50 cents to the dollar back.
No, it's on average, it's 40 to 45 cents for every dollar.
Yeah. So I mean, so you have that part of it. Which, number one, I mean, I kind of curious. I mean, where is that happy medium? Because I think there's an obvious that we're never going to get dollar for dollar back. No. And we shouldn't, right? Because I mean, it's the whole thing. I mean, I forget the numbers, but I mean, Louisville generates definitely over a third of the state's economy. I know it's higher than that. I know we have a third of the population, which, real quick, funny joke, back in, I was in the Marine Corps. When I was getting out of the Marine Corps, I was moving back and went to the U-Haul store and all right, I need to get a U-Haul, and okay, where are you returning to? I'm like, Louisville, Kentucky. And then the guy's looking in his book. Of course, this is before it was all computerized. He's looking at his book. He's like, well, there is nothing. We don't have a location in Louisville. And of course, I knew where the locations were. I'm like, yeah, there's, what do you mean there's no locations? Yeah. And he's like, what was the name of the city? I'm like, Louisville. And he's like, yeah, we don't have anything. What's a bigger city nearby? I'm like, a third of the state lives in this city. What do you mean it's a bigger city? And sure enough, he's all right. He turns the book around. All right, you show me where it is in the city. I'm like, right there, Louisville. It's because he was thinking it's Louisville, right? But yeah. But going back to the whole thing, a very large percent of the population lives in the Louisville region. And sure enough, a lot of our state is very poor. I mean, we've got a third of geographically wise, it is coal mining. And that's their primary, which obviously I mean, that's changing. But I mean, do you know of? Where is that happy medium?
Yeah, in terms of the dollar return on investment, if you look at, like you say, if you look at the amount of revenue that's generated from economic engine that is Louisville, Lexington, and the northern Kentucky area, kind of what they call like Golden Triangle kind of thing. If we can get returned back to Louisville, Metro Louisville, somewhere between like 65 to 72 cents, I know that's almost specific, but it's going to run the numbers, getting in that range, we can then start investing all that type of infrastructure. There are parts of Louisville, by the way, Metro Louisville, that has no access to high-speed internet right now. I mean, that's just a fact. And that's just, like you said, 1/3 of the population and a good, probably 20% of this county doesn't even have access to high-speed internet access. That's just ridiculous. If we want to drive forward with this, we really need to invest in that infrastructure to kind of start building that out. Because as you know, one of the things that we talk about is we want to attract, high-paying technology type of jobs to this area. If we don't have the infrastructure in place to support it, we're not going to get there. So we've got to be able to bring that investment back in to people.
Yeah, and sure enough, I mean, the city of Louisville has done a lot of work over the last decade trying to get more technology companies in. I've been a part of several of those efforts, at least as far as groups coming in to advise. They've done a whole lot, but I mean, some of it is restrictive because there's only so much money going back into the city. So the city itself can only do so much. Yeah,
exactly, and that's why it needs to be done. At least at the state level, from that kind of thing, to kind of bring those type of investment dollars back in and say, okay, like we'll put in this much, and we'll kind of get that, be able to kind of draw those higher paying companies. Interestingly enough, the old phrase, in chaos, there's opportunity. We actually have a rather unique opportunity from a legal standpoint as a result of what's going on with the pandemic. With so many people now working at home, that could act, and you're seeing a push now to kind of make that even at least an option for a lot of people. Say, okay, you can work at home. Well, we can go out to these technology companies, start recruiting the individuals and say, look, if you're working at home, why don't you relocate to Louisville? We have a much lower cost of living. You can come here, work remotely, and we just need to make sure we have the network infrastructure in this case, the communications infrastructure to support that. When we put that in place, like, look, go ahead, locate here. Look, we have a lot to offer, including, like I said, low cost of rent or low cost of living in terms of just the low cost of housing. You can do what you need to do and still be remote.
Yeah, and sure enough, more and more bigger companies are doing that, and you're seeing that in tech. For example, Facebook. They've stated that they're not making anyone come back for the rest of the year, and then starting next year, they're going to give more people the option to work remotely. The interesting part, what I think is going to restrict people, and it's more mental than anything else, but they've also said that they're going to base your salary on where you're living. To include, if you were getting, say, $100,000 today, well, the cost of living might say it's $80,000, so they're going to cut you. And again, it's not that I'm making up numbers, but
right.
But they are going to, even they're not. It's not just new hires. They're going to rebase your salary where you live, and I'd be willing to bet that will curtail some people, from moving, because they're like, well, I'm not so sure how well my money's going to fly. Somewhere where it's cheaper.
Right, exactly. That is true. But again, you can look at the offset. If you, using your scenario, if you go from 100,000 to 80,000, which is a 20% reduction, but you also cut your actual expenses by 25%, you're actually getting more benefit from that. So it depends. That's the numbers people have to work on, but this doesn't preclude us from saying, you know what, let's at least try and do the attraction to bring people to do that.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree. And speaking in Louisville, particularly, because I can speak more about Louisville than I can about the rest of the state. The tech scene in Louisville has definitely flourished. It has a long way to go, but definitely, over the past decade, I've seen it flourish. It's 10 years ago there was barely anything. Now, there's a pretty vibrant community. There's a lot of people who want to do stuff, and again, it's just a matter of getting more in here. But at the same rate, we also have the problem. So we have Speed School, which is one of the better engineering schools in the country. Most of the computer science grads do not stay in Louisville.
No,
and they make it quite, because I've talked to the professors and I've talked to some of the kids, and which I wonder. I'd love to hear what the story will be. Not necessarily the class that graduated this year, but next year's graduating class. Because a lot of it they leave because they want to go for the Facebooks, the Microsofts, the Googles, and so forth. Now that now there's more possibility to do that remotely. I wonder how many more will stay here, but work for for the what's called the FANG companies, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. With those, and also just in general, the startups and things like that. Like recently, I just read an article where. And it's kind of interesting. I'm gonna mix some issues here together in one statement. But it was kind of interesting. I was reading an article recently how mostly like Black entrepreneurs and people and stuff are having a really difficult time getting startups in Silicon Valley, just because of access to, for example, capital to get those tech startups going. Now they actually have, they have done well and flourished a little bit. Why don't we flip the tables as Louisville and say, you know what? Let's try and make Louisville the Black Silicon Valley, for lack of a better phrase. It's like, okay, let's put in place some policies and procedures to attract those high-paying startups and entrepreneurial companies, bring them in here, and just kind of say, well, you know what, let's do that here. And that then looks to help keep that brain drain from occurring from what's going on with, like you just mentioned.
So cool. All right. So
again, but that's part. I'm sorry. I just kind of thought that's kind of dovetail. that's also part of the reason why I'm running for these type of things, because you look at what's going on at the state level in terms of economic development, and they're just stuck in old ideologies and not looking for innovative ways to kind of bring that in. Part of the reason as technologists we're in this business is because we like looking at new things, and we come at things from a different angle. When someone comes up to you and says, as a company, and says, okay, we need this problem solved, most of the time they can't even clearly articulate that problem. So we actually have to play as technologists, play a very detective roles and kind of get in, understand the process, and try and figure out a way to apply technology to solve their business need. Well, this is the exact same issue. We just haven't done it or haven't been part of that discussion at a legislative level, and we kind of need to be part of it now.
So sure enough, because I do want to get through these, and then because I'm going to talk more about technology. So you have infrastructure, you have pension, which I'm not going to go too much in. I mean, the Kentucky pension is just a mess. Although I think a lot of states' pension is a mess. Yeah. And again, Louisville is getting hit hard because of how bad the Kentucky pension is.
Yeah.
But because anyone who's outside of Louisville does not really, it doesn't really impact them as much. But it is a humongous issue here. And for those who don't, so the city of Louisville, on this year's budget, they had to make some drastic cuts because all of a sudden the city had to put more money into the state pension because it is completely insolvent at this point. Right. But some other that are definitely important to most people in tech. So education. Yeah. I like you. So you talked about a student loan payback benefit program. Again, I think that could attract a lot of tech companies because we can, the one problem, in particular we have here in Louisville, and I'm sure it's throughout the state, is we do not have enough people educated in technology. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do not win more businesses. Again, there's programs that are helping that, but so I could see something like this would really help like that. So I like that idea. Yeah.
Well, just to kind of elaborate so that the viewers can actually kind of hear that articulated, here was the idea, is that, we've already started talking about things like possibly, higher education, secondary loan forgiveness programs, but there's also that doesn't necessarily help people who are already out in the workplace kind of things, and it doesn't necessarily also help businesses as well. So that's one part. But the second part is what I was referring to, which you just referred to, which is let's use things like tax incentives as employee benefit pass-through programs to pay to actually help the companies recruit and retain their talent pool by helping them pay down their student loans directly. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, make that part of their compensation package and a retention package so that we can attract people into our tech companies and keep them here by saying, okay, look, if you come work here, we're going to pay off your student loan for you as part of your benefits package, and kind of put that in play.
So I'm curious because obviously student loans. It's been a hot button topic, especially the last couple of years. I know the Democrat Party, National Democratic Party, has been one of their leading platform issues. But I wonder. Is just doing student loan paybacks enough, right? And again, I look at technology, right? So it's one thing for getting the initial education, or even going back to get maybe a master's or that type of thing. Yeah. But one thing is, again, running a conference that I hear a lot, and we work really hard to make the conference as cheap as possible so that an individual can afford it. But I always argue that companies should be paying for it more, right? Yeah. But for a lot of the companies, there's not enough incentive to do so. And I wonder, and again, I'm not saying, but I wonder if that's, a continuation, get that. And then, being able to do other types of education.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. There's an entirely different discussion to be had, mm-hmm. just about the fact that higher education has, and I'm going to kind of fault the legislators for this a little bit, but it's also the actual people, the administrators of the higher education as well, I think have listened a little bit too much to businesses who come in and say things like, we need programmers who can do X in this language. Well, you know what? That's not programming. That's learning a computer language. learning how to program and learning how to code structures is about solving problems. What language you use to do that is almost irrelevant, because you're going to use whatever tool you need to solve that problem. Right now, in terms of, and you're right, businesses have turned that continuing education and that focus of training their people specifically and almost exclusively to higher education. Turns to say, okay, what we just, and basically what they're looking for is a mentorship program. Say, okay, train somebody in this language and give them to me so I can put them to work. It's like, well, you know what? That's not solving your problem. That's just, it's not even necessarily solving a need. It's just solving a task. So we need to address that at a higher level.
Yeah. Well, and one of the problems, and this is a much harder problem to solve, is that the college programs, especially in technology, are a couple years behind. And so, sure enough, I mean, my job, I work for a company that does medical platform or learning platforms for medical schools. So I just see it in the medical world, right? And I can see, because we're at least a year behind because our material comes out once a year, right? Not really true. We're writing content all the time, but still, and obviously in technology, it's even a little bit further behind. And plus, even just being a year behind in technology is like being 10 years behind most anywhere else, right?
Oh, absolutely. That in healthcare, yeah.
So it's, that's a hard part about education. And I do not hire as much anymore just because I work for a smaller company now. But when I was working for HP out at Fort Knox, I was always hiring people, right? It was a constant churn. And when I was hiring, the entry level folks, I much preferred folks who went through the the business schools, programs, the CISs and that type of things, other than the CS programs. It's really from what you're saying, because what I saw from those CIS program folks was that they were learning how to solve problems, not just how to write it. They weren't learning how to write a compiler, right? And I always joke, I'm like, well, how many you really need to learn how to write a compiler? How important is that, right? Now, granted, I did not go to college, so so I can't say whether I've used that knowledge or not. But I can tell you this: I've been doing I've been doing technology forever, right? But I've been professionally doing this since '94. I have never written a compiler in all that time, right? I write business applications, right?
Right. Yeah.
But that's a much bigger problem to solve, and definitely not fair enough to ask the Kentucky legislature to try to solve that problem.
Yeah. But bringing that to the table and actually having that as a discussion, I think is.
I agree. I agree. So then your other two issues that you've got stated. Now I'm gonna get into more technology issues, but I'm gonna leave one alone first. But environment, right? I think that's again, in Louisville, I think we've made great steps. So the state has a long way to go. We are a state, that's still, I wouldn't say heavily dependent, but definitely still dependent on the coal industry. Especially if you go out to Eastern Kentucky. There it is heavily dependent on the coal industry.
Yeah.
And obviously just the mining operations are not very environmentally friendly, near less. Burning coal, and I'm sure enough here in Louisville, we still burn coal for a lot of our electricity.
Although that has been reduced in recent years. There is much more natural gas being burned.
Oh no, but again, I used to work at Fort Knox. I used to drive by the coal burning plant every time.
Oh yeah.
Although I also saw them over the years. You saw them doing work to add the scrubbers and make it a cleaner process. But I also saw the big pits where they were burying up all the old coal that they had burned up.
The coal ash ponds. Yeah,
the coal ash pond. Yeah, and eventually that's got to do something to the environment, right?
It does.
Of course, I always love it. SimCity would always have you do this, right? That big plant is right there on the river, so a lot of it just blows over to Indiana, right? That was always a trick in SimCity, right? You put it on the borders, right? So the
Yeah.
But then the other one, and this has become, it's obviously, especially this summer, this has been an important issue everywhere. But fairness, right? And this has been, this has been an issue for me. in tech, more. I focus more on the technology side of the fairness issue, because I've said for the longest time, we cannot be, we can't be teams of white men in their mid 40s. It just does not work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that a team that's all of that can't work, but obviously, you have a much better team the more diversity you have.
No, absolutely, yeah.
And but is it? I gotta admit, I find it interesting. I think it's a good one to be on there. But I think in Louisville, I think people understand the fairness. I wonder about the rest of the state. I mean, again, I mean the state. And again, I'm not trying to bash my own state, but at the same rate, the state's a little bit older thoughts, right? And has not caught up.
That was a very polite way of stating it.
Well, I gotta admit, I one of the reasons I'm cautious with how I say things, because I am a registered Republican. I don't know about the Republican Party, although I don't know about the Democrat Party either, right? I find problems on both sides, but actually, I joke that I find I'm becoming more libertarian every day, but even there, I have problems with the Libertarian Party, so it's I don't know where I fit. But I mean, I wonder. I mean, how hard of an issue is bringing fairness, to a bigger body? I mean, it's one thing when it's the local community, right?
Yeah.
Because I think the local community can address it quicker. I mean, how do you address something like that in a bigger body like the state?
It's kind of interesting you say that, because I'm going to tell you a story, and I'll tell you how it kind of leads into my thinking about that. If you had asked me maybe 7, 8, 10 years ago what my biggest accomplishment was in my career, I would have given you, and I actually have some really good examples about some sort of technological solution I came up with. Like I was one of the, I set up the first teleradiology ever in the state of Kentucky, kind of thing, stuff like that. But if you had asked me, I would have given you that answer like 7 or 8 years ago. That changed about 7 or 8 years ago when I kind of looked around. I kind of got into a management type of position. As a technology person, I looked around, and like you, I'm like, there's a bunch of white guys around me. Like, really? I mean, it was all a bunch of guys on top of it. So I'd gone out of my way to make sure that and while women had made a good imprint and starting to have a footprint in development software coding, there wasn't as much in the engineering side of things, like the network engineering and system administration part. So I went out of my way to make sure I hired a couple of women for things like network engineering. And one of them, it was a couple of years after she worked for me, I got a call from a headhunter about this type of gig, and I walked over to her and I said, you know what, I'm going to do you a favor that you're not going to understand right now. I said, you really need to apply for this job, and if you don't go for it, I'm going to fire you. It was like, you really need to do this. It was like, it was a much better position. It was going to make her more money. As a result of that, she's now like a VP of a high-powered tech consulting firm. I get more fulfillment out of that at this point in my career than just about anything else, and that's watching all that next generation, trying to help mentor them and bring them in and watch their careers bloom. So personally, I really get a big kick out of that. How we transfer that to legislation is doing such things like we really need to address pay equity for women in our companies. One of the ways we can do that is doing things like let's ask companies to prove whether that they're having equal pay for equal women, and put that list of companies, publish that list of companies publicly. Okay? These are the companies that have proved that they have equal pay for women. Making that an incentive then to say, okay, you know what, if you're not doing that, if you're not on that list, think about it. If you're a company that cannot prove that you have equal pay for women, how many women or how many people who want to see fairness achieved will go to even work for that company? Mm-hmm. So you incentivize that to say, okay, look, those companies who have been able to prove it, here's the list of those companies, and we're promoting those. That then becomes economic attractor for Kentucky in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although I mean, it's interesting. I mean, number one, you talked about basically forcing your employee to go apply for a position. I I always argued, especially when I was running a bigger team, that I thought part of my job to me was finding my employees' next position, whether that was with my company or not.
Yeah.
Right. Because always, striving for them to always grow and so forth. And sure enough, my boss never liked the fact that I say, well, that might not be with our own company. He was like, well, why are you trying to, hide them away? I'm like, well, because maybe that's what's better for them, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same. It's interesting, and I've thought about this a lot. The equality issue, and again, maybe it's just because maybe some of it's me being naive. Some of it maybe just subconsciously I just make sure I don't do it. But but thinking a lot about it, I think the biggest problem, in my mind, and again, maybe this is a little bit of naivety, is not so much that companies don't want to pay equal pay. But again, as an employer, part of our job is to, is the bottom line, right? And Bob, and part of it, and I've talked to a lot of, especially women about this, the problem is most women will undervalue themselves.
Yeah.
When they apply for positions. I do the same for myself because I'm horrible about, every time someone asks, well, how much you want to pay me, what do you want to pay me? And now with it, the systematic part of it is, because again, like I said, I have thought a lot about this. The systematic part is, we also have we expect so many years of experience, but, a woman might not have as much experience because she took a year off for, to raise a child. And personally, I've always said, well, I've looked at it as a different experience, right? That's experience in how to handle people, and how, because handle a child will definitely teach you how to handle people, because there are times you just want to bring that child out, but obviously you're not going to do that, right? It's but no, so the idea of publishing that, although I can, admittedly, I don't know how, once I saw the actual details, I don't know how I feel about it. Because again, my conservative side of me says, well, we want to make sure we're doing right, but at the same rate, the idea is to, is that bottom dollar. I don't know where I fall in that, because at the same rate, again, this was my big complaint when I worked for a major corporation. I was always supposed to hire people at the lowest rate, and I never did. Right, I always hired a little bit higher, and I had these arguments with my account exec, and I'm like, well, here's the thing, I could hire them at say $30,000, right? And guess what? In 2 years, they're gonna be looking for another job. If I hire them at $35,000, in 4 years, they might be looking for another job, right? I'm gonna keep them longer, right? It's. And the honest truth is, it didn't really make that big of a difference to my profit margin, right?
It doesn't.
Because what it does do is, in the 2 years, I'm not having to pay all that money to go hire another person.
You actually hit on the business reason for why we need to make sure we actually pay people. And that's really the cost of retention and actually bringing someone in and doing that retraining is almost 3 to 4 times what it would be just to go ahead and pay them that equal rate and to getting them in. And that's the disconnect that a lot of our businesses, and it's incumbent upon us as people who would be in positions of tech hiring, in this case, with that, to make sure that we actually say, to actually, when someone says, not even ask the question about, what do you expect in the salary range, say, if they come back and say this, what, you need to bump that up. It's like, that's not only in their best interest, but it's really in the best interest of the company. Because again, you're increasing that retention. You're also then instilling some loyalty, to be honest with them. Say, what, we're going to pay you more than that because, well, I think you're worth more than that. And that's just all part of it. So because the cost of actually, again, is trying to hire new, retain, and retrain. It just, look, let me put it in terms that everybody, all the tech geeks out there can understand. When you're in the middle of writing a code structure and your phone rings, you have to answer that support call. It takes you, that 5 minutes that you spend on that phone call takes you an hour to get back to where you were.
Yep. Oh yeah.
It's the exact same scenario.
Yeah. That's actually the reason why I end up not writing so much production code anymore, because I'm a director, right? So I get distracted all the time, right?
Yeah.
I'm hired to write code, but I don't write very much code because I don't get that concentration time.
Yep.
So well, let's look at some other issues in tech that politics definitely comes into. And the first one I look at is like like GDPR. California's now got the CCPA, which I don't know how effective that's going to be after reading some of the things, but what can we do? I mean, because obviously, the United States has a different problem, and I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding this. But we are federal. We are a federal society, which means the states have more power than what most people think. But I also worry, and this worry has subsided a little bit. But I worry about every state having its own protection law. But at the same rate, I mean, the federal government actually cannot necessarily do. The federal government, I don't know how well the federal government could implement a GDPR because of states' rights, right? I mean, some of it does go into states' rights. Talking about Kentucky, I mean, because obviously, I mean, you're running for in Kentucky. I mean, is there something we could do in Kentucky to do better protection for digital privacy?
Well, there's always something you can do better. I mean, it really is. In the state of Kentucky right now, a lot of they've kind of deferred a lot of that to whatever federal law structure there currently is right now, like HIPAA, PCI, and all those type of things. They haven't really addressed that within a state and localized level from that standpoint. It is something we kind of really need to address there, just in the matter of, well, I'm going to kind of equate it back to healthcare right now. But if we have if we go to a statewide healthcare system in some way, shape, or form, and where we're sharing data across different platforms. Here's a good one, like mental health studies. Like, for example, if right now, if a healthcare worker determines that someone could be a danger to themselves or others, they're actually not allowed to share that information, for example, to a law enforcement agency to kind of help mitigate that situation. So instead, there's no sharing of, and it's primarily because there's no sharing of data information structure between those two entities. So how do we put that piece together? How do we share that information in a way that it becomes secure and standardized across those different platforms? Here's another area where this type of legislation from privacy comes to play. Right now, I actually have a registered copyright for software to transmit EHR information from the providers to the public health departments in a secure type of fashion. Because right now, the form that's called the EPID 200 form, that form is still done pretty much primarily by fax at this point. But there is the software that I put together, and it's actually, I went ahead and put it out as open source at this point. But you can send information from a hospital to the public health department. You can de-identify that information, normalize that information, encrypt that information, and structure it so that it can be unincorporated once it gets back to its destination. This is where the technologists need to come into play for legislation for things like privacy, because while the legislators may want to look at that, they don't know how to structure that information. They don't know how to structure that legislation to deal with that. So if we take that just intrastate type of information, okay, how do we roll that up to more of more like, for example, if you retire and your primary residence is here, which is where EHR information may be, but you then vacation or winter in Florida, people need to be able to move that information from point A to point B, take their medical record with them. So we need to be able to address that, if not at the state level, to at least incorporate that with the federal laws that are in place.
I wonder. So it's funny. I live here in Louisville, but up until 2016, I had never worked in healthcare, and then I switched to healthcare, which was an eye opener. One of the things that I saw, all of a sudden now having learned about HIPAA and high tech, I think HIPAA and high tech have stifled innovation more than it's helped. Right? Because and I wonder, is this because maybe we have the wrong people making these laws, right? Because I mean, it is. I mean, you talk about the fax machine, right? I mean, that was one. So I was basically leading IT for a pretty decent size physical rehab company, and with offices in 9 different states and everything. And I was there about 2 months, and all of a sudden, the fax systems on several locations were going kaput. And and I'm like, of course, my first reaction is, why are we using fax?
Yeah.
And then I found out, we have to use fax because that's what the hospitals require. And I'm like, of course, in my mind, I'm like, this is the stupidest thing ever, right? I mean, it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought fax machines died, right? I mean, is that really just a matter of, I mean, again, what your argument of we just need more tech savvy folks making these laws, or is there a true privacy issue that we need to issue? And unfortunately, that stifles, innovation because of that.
Well, I take the argument that it's really the former. That it really is the fact that they don't understand what this technology can do, because there's so much fear around the fact of, like, data transmission, for example. Like, well, what if somebody gets my information? What if well, you know what? To be honest with you, I can find out more about you today than I ever could before. And all I really, you need very little information to do that. Transferring that information and securely transferring that information is primarily because the people that are making those laws really don't understand that technology. They don't understand. Like, so when I say things like de-identifying, normalizing, and encrypting that information, I know what I'm saying from a standpoint of how those encryption mechanisms work and how the data works. They really don't. Mm-hmm. So the first thing they run to then is saying, well, what about? Well, what if? Well, can't somebody do this? It's like, well, unfortunately, what has happened in some cases, because some of us are technologists, kind of thing, we give an answer which doesn't satisfy their fear, because it's like, well, because we know that anything that can be created can also be uncreated. So we know this. But you do every possible means to protect against that, and every way you can do that. But I would agree with you that some of those laws, because of the fact of the individuals that crafted them, didn't understand the technology in place behind it, have actually stifled that innovation as a result. But and that is my argument. I don't know that it was necessarily so much a privacy issue as just, like everything else that changes, and especially around technology, there's a fear factor about it. I mean, the company I'm currently, for example, I'm working with today, that's 7 companies that have been bought and purchased under one to implement an enterprise-wide ERP system. Every company I've ever worked for, the biggest problem we have in terms of technology adoption is overcoming that initial fear of it. It's like, okay, well, this is the way I've done things. So, but if I do something new, am I going to lose control? What's going to happen? I mean, there's a fear factor. As technologists, we overcome that in terms of when we start doing the implementation phase of that, so that we can get greater adoption. And it's the same thing with legislation on this, on things like privacy and things like that. It's just, someone in the room needs to be there to understand at a fundamental level what that technology is and can do. Otherwise, we get that type of crafted legislation like HIPAA and high tech that have big holes in it, and actually, like you said, stifles the innovation around it.
Yeah. So looking at a couple other issues, because another really hot topic this year is the facial recognition, in particular with law enforcement. I mean, what are your thoughts about using facial recognition for law enforcement?
I actually tend to agree with the fact that we probably shouldn't be using it, because it does, from the data that I've seen, it is, and actually I think there were like 1,400 mathematicians now have signed on to no longer support that software infrastructure to do that, because when they actually went back and looked at the data, it does have disparate impact on our minority communities. It directly does. Now, facial recognition as a technology is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But when used improperly, then it can have disparate impact, and it does do that. So, again, it's one of those things that if someone is not in the room who understands that technology to help mitigate how it's employed, then we get bad solutions.
I mean, one of the biggest problems in technology, and technologists are just as bad as this as anyone else, is technology gets used. Sometimes we overuse technology. We think this is the cure-all for everything. Use facial recognition to solve our crimes instead of, maybe use some common sense and look, that guy looks nothing like, like the match, right? I admit my fear, right, with this recent, in all these, municipalities and states, say, okay, we're going to ban the use of facial recognition in law enforcement, which, number one, means companies are going to stop working on that type of technology.
Yeah.
But is that, do we want to stifle that innovation, or do we want to encourage innovation to fix the problem? I mean, because it's a fixable problem, right? I mean, it's the problem is that, really the problem is people just didn't think about it 10 years ago when this was when people started working on it, which, again, goes back to why we need diversity in teams, right? Yeah. Because, maybe if you had a person of color on your team, you would have saw, oh, hey, we can't match this guy, right? It's maybe that would have worked a lot better, right? So I don't know. I got to admit, I worry about that for that reason, right? But at the same rate, so I personally, and this is now me. Hey, Mr. Politician, if you win, this is what I like to see. I would see not so much is putting, sorry to say more investment, because I think companies have their own, the Microsofts, the Googles, these companies, they've got the money to invest it, but somehow give them incentive to ensure they continue to work on this, so we can make this a possibility. Maybe it's 10 years away. For example, I mean, I was listening to NPR a couple weeks ago, and there was a black man who was arrested. I don't think he was convicted. I think he was only arrested, falsely arrested. And apparently now granted this was voiced, so I couldn't see the videos, but apparently the guy looked nothing like what like the picture they were trying to match. And he then his lawyers then fought to have his picture removed from the database, and because they added his picture afterwards. And I'm like, well, actually, it would have been better to keep the picture in, because that would have added more data to the model, right? I mean, that's the whole. I mean, the whole thing about AI, as you well know, I mean, it's pattern matching, right? And the more they have the match, the better off it is. So I don't know. And again, not a problem that can be solved, over a hour long, plus conversation, but
but I actually, let's take that specific example. I think you actually bring up a very valid point about that. And again, when we start talking about the higher technologies that are just emerging, things like AI and machine learning, those type of constructs, that example you just said is exactly right. It's like, what if there was someone in the room who said, well, wait a minute, by taking him out or taking that out, you're actually reducing your data set. So now you're actually increasing your error probability. It's like you have to understand that this is a learning tech. The way this stuff works is that it learns by being wrong, frankly. So that's how it actually works. If we don't have people in the room who understand that, then you're going to get those arguments, which, while valid, they're trying to get justice for the individual, but at the same time, they've actually increased the chance that someone else is going to have a problem. And that's also, you need someone in the room who understands that technology from that, as we put in play. As we kind of start out the conversation, we live in this world now where technology use is going to increase. It will not decrease at this point. It just won't. So if we don't have people in the room who understand that, then these are the impacts that are going to occur.
I mean, just now thinking about it, in that situation, I wonder what the confidence score was, right? It was probably like a 30% confident, right? Which means you should not have used it at all, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing. I just wrote a little Python code recently to kind of go through new pattern matching for some item codes and descriptions, and I used the 4 different scores for it. I did exact match, embedded match, fuzzy match, and a very fuzzy match kind of thing. And by the time you get to fuzzy matching, even if that fuzzy match looks like a confidence score is somewhere between 80 and 90%, you really, it's a swag, really. It's all it really is at that point. I mean, really, just say, well, it looks kind of sort of right, but if you're doing that in a legal or law structure, that shouldn't even be part of the conversation at that point. Yeah.
So I mean, again, I just now thought. I mean, I wonder if that's part of what needs to be legislated. Is that in order to use such, you need to have at least a confidence score of something, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what that confidence score is because actually, talk about scaring people who have no idea about technology. Start talking about confidence scores, and I mean, we're implementing more and more. We're teaching, we're helping kids learn and practice, prep for tests. And we're using more and more machine learning. And some of the stuff, we're dependent on 85% accuracy or confidence, I should say.
Yeah.
And we're happy with that because it still makes a big difference. But like when I talk to my executives, they're like, 85%, can't we get it better? Well, we started at 50%, so we're doing pretty darn good, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was looking at my other things I wrote down. So we talked a little bit about this, but what do you think about the digital divide? I mean, you talk about, even in Louisville, right? It's such a big city. I mean, we have pockets of the city where people don't have technology. On top of it, I don't believe the school is going to be back in session this fall, despite what everyone wants to say. And one thing that I heard, was that there were plenty of kids who just didn't have access to a computer to even do the stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, how do we address the digital divide? I mean, I think it's a tough one to address.
It is, and it's so many. It's multifaceted, multidimensional on so many levels. But like you said, it touches everything from education to the workforce itself, all the way through that construct. And if we don't, there has to be a way for us to actually work in partnership with places like Verizon and other types of companies. Like you said, like Microsoft has cash to burn. So does Facebook. So does Google. I mean, these companies have cash to burn. It is in their best interest, and we need to look at ways of partnering with them to help bridge that digital divide. Because if we don't, especially right now, like you said, I agree with you. I don't think we're going to have the kids back in school because there's too many unanswered questions.
Mm-hmm.
If we open up the schools and one kid comes in and tests positive, do you shut down that school? That now puts 100 kids out again. So we have to find a way to address that, and technology is a way to do it. We have actually figured out, by the way, even by the workforce numbers that have come out, people who are working remotely are actually at least 95 to 90, if not 100%, as productive as they would be inside the workplace. Kids actually now, in terms of their learning workplace, as we learn, they're going to become much more efficient and much more productive once we do that. But there has to be a way to have a public-private partnership to address those issues. I think at the state level, what we should be looking at, like I said, is investing in those economic centers and those like Louisville and Metro Louisville to expand out that digital infrastructure, that digital footprint to reach those areas, and then partner with the local type of companies to provide the laptops or the desktops or whatever needs to be in play to kind of get those in the hands of those kids. But to build out the infrastructure to kind of get there. There also needs to be some sort of way of subsidizing the actual, or at least an offsetting cost structure for putting that, for getting that high-speed internet access to those individuals, whether that's working with 5G or whatever. Because I'm putting in my business hat a little bit. There's the capital expenditure cost of actually putting something in play, but then there's the operating cost structure of actually being able to afford it. And if we don't put two together and say, okay, look, we can give people that infrastructure, but then we have to actually then help provide that over a long period of time and subsidize that in some way, shape, or form. If we don't do that for our kids, we are then leveraging our future to some other country who's going to do it, frankly. And that's just really, that's the bottom line. We are actually leveraging out the future of this, the future economic power of this country by not providing that today to as many people as we possibly can, and closing that digital divide as fast as we can.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And the crazy part in Kentucky, and I I read about this a while ago, and I don't know much about it, but apparently we've got a big fiber pipeline going throughout the state of Kentucky, but it's hardly used.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Again, it was legislators and legislation that had good ideas, good intentions, but they put it in place without thinking, of course, about the last mile access to it. And that's, it's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, okay, you put in place this large pipeline infrastructure, but you didn't think about the last mile access into the people's homes to actually get it to them at that point. What did you think was going to happen? And when you get into to geographic studies of some of that, like for example, we talked about Eastern Kentucky, for example, you need Wi-Fi access and wireless access into those areas becomes much more difficult because of the line of sight type of issues when you get into those mountains and hollers. So you're going to have use different types of technology in those areas as opposed to the Louisville metro area or even the western part of the state, where you have the geographics of the area dictate different types of technology infrastructure.
of course, the whole state is very hilly.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the flatter areas, it's not that flat, right?
That's true.
Obviously, the more east you go, the flatter it gets, but it's still, Western Kentucky still, has the tail end of the Ozarks, so it's still not flat. But the last mile, that is one of the hard issues, And I was just thinking back, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago when we had the ice storm, and then we had the wind storms come through and knocked out a whole lot of power, and of course everyone here in Louisville was clamoring, why do we not, why are we still so dependent on above ground electricity? Because a lot of cities still is above ground, and of course then it was, well, because to bury it is $1 million a mile, right? Where are we supposed to get that money, right? Now, grant you, spreading out 5G and stuff does not require, because obviously again, we already have the poles, we can run it on the poles, but still, so it might not cost $1 million a mile, but it's still going to cost, I'd be willing to bet probably $250,000 a mile, just taking taking a swag at what it would cost. So it's hard.
Yeah, and even so, and again, that's just a capital expenditure at that point. You still have to then account for what's the monthly recurring maintenance fees and requirements to actually support that.
Mm-hmm.
That's all part of it.
Well, awesome. So I've got a list. We can go on for a couple more hours with my list. But is there any other big tech issue that I didn't bring up that you find really interesting? You would love to be able, if you win your election, you would love to be able to start addressing.
Well, it's just those type of things. Like this, we kind of touched on a little bit from the standpoint of like AI and machine learning. These are emerging technologies that are going in place that we really need people in place in our legislatures to understand. But on top of that, things that kind of really, really excite me are the things that are coming down around quantum computing type of infrastructures. Why can't Kentucky be one of those places that can be some part of that development of those type of new technologies that are coming down place? We need to be looking at actively recruiting and bringing those type of things. Again, Kentucky has a lot to offer from a standpoint of just lifestyle, cost of living, and those type of things. We just don't have two things. One, we don't seem to have foreshadowing and forethought of what's going on at the legislative level, and as a result, we keep going back to ideas that just let me put it this way. Let me put it in campaign terms. We need new ideas and new innovations for a new economy, and that's not what's going on. You look at the unemployment rate with the state as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that was going on. We were the number 2 state in the nation for unemployment rate. We had a 40% unemployment rate at one point, which to me, when I look at that, tells me that we don't have enough sustainable, long-term, high-paying jobs to weather this type of storm. That they're not the type of jobs that we want. We need to go after those type of technology jobs that can help produce more lower employment and be able to weather those type of events. We just haven't thought in those terms quite often. And the type of technologies that are out there that we can kind of look at, like I said, you're talking about the coal company. I read an article not too long ago, for example, in eastern Kentucky, where out of the Oak Ridge former nuclear facility, they had tested and actually were taking coal to produce carbon fiber technology with it in terms of extrusion techniques. Well, since we want to get away from using coal as a fuel source, which is inefficient to begin with, can we use that to do things like produce carbon fiber technologies? And looking at those type of infrastructures as well. Because there is the green technology movement does not necessarily have to be related to just specifically energy.
Sure.
And those are the type of technologies that are out there that we can kind of look at.
Yep. Well, no, it's been great. Well, real quick, I guess before we, because we never did talk about your talk you'll be doing at Code PaLOusa. Which again, like I said, I knew this was gonna be a little bit different, but so real quick, I mean, so your talk is government regulation in the age of AI and digital transformation. Obviously a lot of what we've been talking about for the past a bit over an hour, deals with that. But I mean, what someone who attends that session, what is going to be the key takeaway they're going to get out of that session?
Primarily that without people like us in legislation, and I really want to use this for two things. One, to outline some of the things we've talked about before. But I also want to say, as almost in some ways a recruiting tool, to say, look, you technologists need to run for office. It doesn't matter if you win or not. We need to at least have a voice at the table. And that sometimes means just put your name on a ballot, say the things that you need to say with regard to technology so that we can get those issues out there.
Great. Well, it's been great having you, join me today, and more importantly, joining us at Code PaLOusa. You live here, so I don't have to say. It's funny. Most people I say, "Well, I wish you could be able to be, come to this awesome city," but you live here, so it's you know how awesome it is, right? I mean, I just love this area, and I do think, this does give me the opportunity to also say, spend a little bit of time, researching the candidates for whatever position you're in. I always tell everyone, there's no problem. I don't have a problem with you voting along party lines as long as you actually looked at who's the candidates and it just made sense that you voted along party lines. But I also don't think that we always have to vote, along party lines, right? And I said I'm a Republican. I can't remember the last time I voted for a Republican for mayor of Louisville, just because, honestly, the honest truth is here in Louisville, Republicans have no chance really for the mayor position. So no one good really ever runs, which is a whole different problem we have. But I always say I don't. Last couple of years, I've never had a problem voting for them, right? And they've not been Republican in any stretch of the manner. Actually, I'm drawing a blank of the current mayor's name. Fisher, yes. Admittedly, I think he's a little bit more conservative than some folks would like, but because he comes from that business background, right?
Yeah.
But great. Like I say, it's been great having you. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
And I'm sure everyone will be looking forward to your presentation at Code PaLOusa.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Let's see here.